has a reason. Because as much as we've been walking through faith, remember, faith, it's full of twists and turns. It's full of peaks and valleys. It's full of kind of things that you're going to be surprised by. But sometimes faith brings you back to this very same place that you've been at before. In Peter, in his letter to the church, and in Proverbs, both of them have the same phrase, and I love it. It's 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, easy to remember. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, okay, says, and he's quoting Proverbs 26:11, as a dog will return to its vomit, so a fool will return to its folly. Guys, we're going to walk into a story today with Abraham, and it seems like we've been here before because we have. It's that whole going back to the puke thing, and you're like, why would you ever do that? Why would you ever, vomit up chunk and then go back and eat that? That's just gross. That's what dogs do. And yet we do that, if you could stay with me through the illustration, we do that almost all the time. Do you realize that we have the same issues, the same song, second, third verse, all the way through our life? God is constantly, it seems like, bringing us back to the same things. We just dealt with this in our home here recently. It seems like that we can, like my two boys, they're brothers, and that sometimes you're going to get into some fights. You're going to get into some bickering. And they're bickering, it seems like, a couple of times. And it's like, it's never once and done. You never just learn, right? And so yesterday, we just had a real heart-to-heart. Maybe the reason that you and Evan are constantly butting heads is because God's trying to teach you something about yourself. You ever thought about it that way? And maybe that's why God brings us back to the same places that we try to avoid in our life. Maybe that's why we have the same issues over and over and over and over again, and it seems like we could just never shake it. Maybe it's because we just haven't found the lessons. But today, I hope that I'm able to give you some just very practical things. One very practical thought as we move into this story. See, the last couple of weeks as we've walked through faith with Abraham, we've seen kind of a wide spectrum, if we can. The last 2 weeks, we dealt with God's holy wrath and justice. And it's very fierce and very terrifying, very scary, right? We've seen that in Genesis chapter 19 the last couple of weeks. Today, what we're going to find is the opposite side of that spectrum. Not only is God, yes, for sure, he is a God of wrath, and yes, he is a God of justice. He hates sin, and he hates what sin's doing to you, and he will always kill sin. That's what he's on mission to do, because he hates that sin is killing you. But on the opposite side of that spectrum, we get to see God's absolute undying love and mercy and grace. And that's what chapter 20 is all about. So if you want to turn your Bibles to chapter 20, again, it's going to feel very familiar. We've been through something like this before if you've been following through our sermon series. But when we come to those recognizable points, when we start spinning in circles, it's important for us to have our eyes out and start finding the constant lines. We talked about that last year in the spring. But it seems like that for many of us, as we navigate faith and as we navigate even our own life, we have a tendency to get lost. We have a tendency to find ourselves in those same spots, and it's just normal to do, right? If you're trying to find a destination, it's easy for us to get lost because we don't keep our eyes out. It's easy for us to only come back to the same places that we've been in the past. I've done this many times in the Boundary Waters. I've done this. I used to do this more than I do this as I age because it seems like by God's grace I'm able to learn. I remember one specific time where last week when we went to Texas, there was this kind of valley that our family went through. Like we got back home and we were talking about what were your high points, what were your low points, and everyone said it was the low point of the trip. And it's me returning to my own vomit. It's me returning to that same spot of weakness that I've always been at. And you could say it was nature, you could say it was nurture, whatever you want to call it. I just messed up, and I owned it. But here's how I messed up, and I'll just share it with you. Down in Texas, they have these things that we don't have yet, or at least I haven't seen them yet. Family, help me out. What are they called? Birds, right? The birds. And so it's like a motorized scooter that you could pay, like put some credits on it, and you could just scoot around town. It's kind of cool. It makes transport a lot faster. of course, my family was like, hey, we got to do that. Okay, let's get a couple of birds. So we're flying around town with these little scooters. I think Evan's going to kill everybody, but he didn't. He did a really nice job. But there was one spot where Joe and Grace, they took off. And the kind of the thing for me was, we're only going to get a couple of them. You guys take off, go around a couple of blocks, come back. Well, Joe didn't come back for a while. And so I was a little aggravated. And my fuse is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And he just got lost. It wasn't a big deal. He just got lost. But you know what happens when he gets lost in a city and I can't find him and Grace? I'm going to go nuts. I'm going to go ballistic. So when he finally does come back, guess what I did? I went right back to my old wells. I went right back to my old vomits. Those old things that I hated about growing up, those old things that I swore that I would never be or I would never do came out. Guys, I know you know exactly what I'm talking about. The bigger issue here isn't that Joe got lost. The bigger issue is that I got lost. I got lost in my own mess. I came back to the same stupid spots that I've sworn off before in the past, and that's what we're talking about. And not only from a relational standpoint does that happen, but also from a navigational standpoint does that happen. I remember the very first time that Mandy and I had ever gone to see her family up in Minnesota. We had come back on 15 South, and we're looking at 90 East and West, and I was directionally challenged. I had barely been off the farm. I'd never driven out of the state of Missouri. And so we are in this, God's country of Minnesota, and we go south, and I thought we were supposed to turn right. We're supposed to turn left. And so by the time I finally figured it out, because she was sleeping, it was 2 hours in the wrong direction. She wakes up, she's like, so how close are we? I have no idea. I felt like this tall. I'm surprised she ever married me. I would have, you're an idiot. I would have moved on, right? That's what I thought she was going to say. But because she's a loving, gracious wife, she stayed with me, and she saw some potential. After, maybe, I don't know. I think that's what happened. What's that? She just wanted to get home, yeah. She's like, get me out of this car. That's exactly what it was. She had time to think about it, though. Maybe that was the trick. So we moved to Omaha, Nebraska, and I remember going to Omaha, Nebraska, and I remember farm kid. My upbringing, I had about 35 people in my little village that I grew up in, and we had about 300 cattle. That was our population sign in Hartford, all right? It was pretty small. And so you take the farm kid out of the farm and you put him in the big city of Omaha, Nebraska, and he's lost. I was lost. And I remember just kind of crying out in the inside of my heart, just saying, God, I need your help. I have no idea where to turn. And all of a sudden, it just clicked. Like north, south, east, west, like the whole structure, their terminologies, their glossary. I don't know. It felt like the Matrix just was infused into me. Like I all of a sudden had the whole map thing figured out in Nebraska. And from that point on, really, navigation hasn't been a problem. It hasn't at all. And I know having a great sense of direction helps with navigation. There's no doubt about that. But sometimes through that great sense of direction and through that navigation, we still find ourselves in the same old spots that we've been in. So hopefully by now you're in Genesis chapter 20. Let's read through this. Now, we have been in chapter 19, and I got to share this with you before I go too far. I am not going to read Genesis 19, 30 through 38. It's not because I'm avoiding it. It's just, while it's important to the whole biblical narrative, it's not significant to our story with Abraham. So parents, you can have fun with this one when you get home if you want to, but it's basically the story of Lot and his daughters, okay? And why that's a significant play in the rest of the narrative is because through those unions, you have two enemies of Israelites' people. You have the Moabites and the Ammonites who are birthed out of this union. But more specifically than the enemies, God is still present through that weird story. Because it would be Ruth who would eventually become, her ancestors are the Moabites, and Ruth was David's great-grandma. So even through this very weird story, God's hand is still in it. Even when we take wrong turns, God still guides. And I love that principle. But parents, you guys can have fun with this this week. So let's read chapter 20, verse 1. Here it goes. Now Abraham moved from there into the region of the Negev. Now, Negev just literally means parched land, is what it means. And so he lived between Kadesh, and Kadesh means holy, which I absolutely love. It's very symbolic of what was happening in chapter 12 of Genesis, that land between holiness and sin, that sometimes we find ourselves right in the middle between greatness and glory and just destruction and death. And so we see this kind of happening again. So he's living in Kadesh, which means holy, and Shur, which is literally a wall, and that's what that word means. And we've been here before in Genesis chapter 16 when Hagar takes off. This is the area she goes to. In fact, this is the same place that they had gone through when they went to Egypt. So they had gone kind of back to the same old stuff. And it says, for a while he stayed in Gerar. Now, Gerar is significant. I mean, it kind of has this guttural meaning. It has a meaning like a sawtooth sliding across a board. That's what it literally is kind of representing. It's that, right? That's what Gerar means. But Gerar means lodging place. It means to be drug away to a lodging place. So that's where the setting of our story is today. Gerar would also become a huge Philistine outpost in later narratives in the biblical line. So you'll find all kinds of activity happening in Gerar. But Abraham says to his wife, hey, remember our deal from way back. I want you to say anywhere we go that you're going to be my sis, all right? All right, sounds good, brother. And so they kind of have that little thing. But Abimelech, now Abimelech's not a name, it's a title. Okay, so if you want to write that or indicate that in your Bible somehow, this is kind of like saying Pharaoh. And he was the chief of the Philistines. He was the leader of a people. And so that's who Abimelech is. We're going to see that same name later if we deal with Isaac. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah because these two new people in their clan have moved in. And he's like, man, one of those she's a knockout. I know she's old, but woo, have you seen her? And so he sends for her because she's not married to anybody. Why not? And not only after he takes her and places her in his harem, which is so weird and radical to think about. I mean, think about a 90-year-old being around a bunch of 20 to 30-year-olds in a harem, right? I mean, that's what's happening there. That's how beautiful Sarah was. And she was looking pretty good. Now, perspective. Iris Swanson is 88. She'll be 88 this spring. One of the things she loves to say is she's 88 and she's not taking any pills. She's ready. And I was like, Iris, you are so weird. I absolutely love that about you, but you are just so odd the way that you talk sometimes. And she said, no, Steve, I'm just living life. Now, I don't know if you've known this or not, but the last couple of years, she's kind of been dealing with a cancer issue, right? A tumor. We've been praying for her on our prayer list. Do you realize that even like this last time that she went back, it's not only been cut in half once, it's been cut in half now twice. The medication that she's taking is phenomenal. She's seeing just aggressive strides against it. But she's 88. That's the sort of lady that we're talking about with Sarah. And Sarah, she's a fine woman. She looks really good. And Abimelech, I think, thinks, hey, this is a way for us to make sure that we're tight, that everything's good. So he takes Sarah and he puts her in her harem, or his harem, and she's hanging out with a bunch of 20 and 30-year-olds. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at in the story. So then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sends for her and takes her. Verse 3, but God said to Abimelech in a dream one night, and said to him, or came to Abimelech in a dream and said to him, you're as good as dead because of the woman that you've taken. She is married. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said to the Lord in the dream, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Now stop and think about this for a second. Why do you think Abimelech asks that question? Why do you think Abimelech, that's the first thing he thinks about? This is probably the same reason that drove Abraham down into his area, right? Because Abraham, for some reason, leaves. It's not a famine. It doesn't say that in Scripture like it did back in chapter 12 and 13. It just says that he took up his tent stakes and bundled everything up and came down south. Why? I think it's because he doesn't know, like, I think as he saw the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, he's not sure if Lot survived. He doesn't know what happened to him. And I think he just has to get out of there because of the emotional scarring that's happening to him. But not only would Abraham have left the area because of the Sodom and Gomorrah destruction, I believe all the other surrounding nations and kingdoms and kings went, oh, what was that all about? There's some God that's angry at the world, and wow. So if a God comes to you and you're dreaming and he says, you're as good as a dead man because of what you've done, your first response is going to say, whoa, time out. What'd I do? Like, she didn't say she was married. Are you going to destroy my entire nation? Because I think I'm innocent. And that's the sort of reaction that we see with Abimelech. And he says, you're as good as a dead man because the woman you have taken, she's married. Now Abimelech had gone near her, or had not gone near her, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And did she not also say to me that he is my brother? I have done this, I love this phrase, this is one of my favorite phrases in this entire chapter, with a clear conscience and clean hands. Clear conscience and clean hands. Some of you, if you're reading a New American Standard or a King James Version or an ESV version, almost every other version will have a different way to say this same thing. The NIV is very unique in the way that it says it. I actually prefer the other translations, and here's what it says. I have done this with integrity in my heart and innocence in my hands. He is saying, listen, you can examine me from the inside out, from things that are happening internally to things that are happening externally, from things that are happening physically to things that are happening spiritually. I didn't know that this was wrong. And I think sometimes we come into that situation with God, right? We've heard, and maybe if you haven't, this would be helpful for you. There are two types of sins that we know about. The first one is the sins of commission and the sins of omission. So the sins of commission are when you know, don't take the fruit, because if you take the fruit, you're going to die, but you take the fruit anyway. That's a sin of commission. You know what not to do, but you went ahead and did it. It's what Paul would have referred to in Romans. It's the do-do passage. The thing I do not want to do, I do, and the thing I do not want to do, I end up doing. I don't even know why I do what I do. I mean, that's where Paul's at in his mindset. It's a sin of commission. But there are sins of omission, and that's very different. Sins of omission are, something that you know you should be doing, but you don't do. You see the difference between omission and commission? It's knowing what's wrong and choosing it anyway, and knowing what's right and not doing that thing. Neither of these things are happening. And this language reminds me of James chapter 4, verse 7 and 8. When James writes, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil. Like, flee from him. Push him away, and he'll run away from you. Draw near to God. Come near to God. Fall at God's feet, and he will come near to you. And then James says, wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. There have been many times in my personal walk, sometimes I've done this in services, worship services. I didn't do it today because I'm not sure if you would have connected with it. This is something maybe you want to try to do personally. I have literally gone to a basin before, and I've just said, God, I want to come near to you again. My hands have done things I don't want them to do. I have thought thoughts I didn't want to think. I have seen things I didn't want to see. I have said things I shouldn't have said. I have felt things. I have had things inside that I didn't want. Lord, I need you not only to cleanse me from the outside in, but I need you to cleanse me everywhere. And that's what Abimelech's saying. He said, I didn't do anything wrong here, God. Why would you destroy not only me, but my entire nation? This is a completely different ballgame. And Abimelech is, in some ways, justified, and God reacts appropriately. I love God's mercy and grace. He knows that Abimelech didn't do this on purpose. He knows that he's held integrity tight. And look at what God says. It's in verse 6. I love God's reaction. Yeah, I know. Very first thing. Yeah, I get it. Yep, I know. I get it. I want you to know, though, something, that you did this with a clear conscience, and that's why I've kept you from sinning against me. That's why I didn't let you touch her. Now, I don't know if the whole harem got sick. I don't know if Abimelech got sick. I don't know. God was in this moment, though, to make sure that there would be no question on the promises that he has given to this woman and to this man, Abraham, that there would be no chance of compromise. And so he prevents Abimelech from ever altering the story. And he is fighting our battles constantly for us. He's fighting invisible battles all the time. God is going before you. If you have claimed him as your king, he is your shield, he is your sword. He fights your battles. And he's fighting for Abraham here without even Abraham knowing it. And he says, now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you can be sure that you and all of yours will die. There's a couple of quotes here that I just think that we have to get to. Charles Spurgeon said these two things. First, serve God with integrity, and if you achieve no success, at least sin will not lie upon you. I love that attitude. Serve God with integrity. Let him figure out everything else. And if you don't get anything done in your life, at least you've had integrity, and sin it won't befall on you. It won't taint you. It won't be around you. It's like that Psalm 91 passage. And then he said later, you lose your strength the moment you depart from your integrity. Integrity is the whole fighting thing. It's the thing that holds armor together for a Roman. So when Paul is talking about wearing your spiritual armor, that integrity, that integros, it's what held everything together. That was the whole fight with Job. That's what God told Satan when he was tempting Job. Hey, listen, his integrity will not fall. No matter what you do to him, he has integrity. And we can have the same sort of attitude and mindset as long as we don't worry about what happens on the outside, but we're worried about what's happening on the inside. God will be with us. So, let's keep reading here. Early the next morning, he reacts almost immediately. I love this. He gets everybody involved. He grabs his officials and he tells them all that had happened. And they were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham in, and now this is when it gets fun. He says, what have you done to us? What have I done wrong to you that you've brought this great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done. And Abimelech asks Abraham, why? What's your reason for doing this? And look at Abraham's response. Abraham's response kind of harkens back to Genesis chapter 3. There's some familiar language. He says, I said to myself, there surely is no fear of God in this place. They'll kill me because of my wife. Besides that, she really is kind of my sister, the daughter of my father, although not my mother. She became my wife. And then when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say that he's my brother. You see, here's what I see with Abraham's response. I see him saying, listen, if you had been a better man, if your country had been better people, I would have not done this thing. This is your fault that I did this. You don't know Jesus. You don't know God the Father like I know the God the Father. And if you had known God the Father, then I wouldn't have done this thing. So this is on you. Right? You see the second response here? He said, besides, technically, she is kind of my sister. I mean, like, there's a technical aspect to this. Like, she is the offspring of my dad. She's not my mom's daughter. She's another mom's daughter. So technically, I wasn't really lying. I mean, like, there's a line, and I'm going to get as close to that line as I can. We play that all the time. It is a dangerous game to play. I do this a lot of times through our marriage counseling. I ask one very strategic question. I've done this in Sunday school a million times, and you'll probably know the answer to this. If you know the answer to this, you're not playing. If you've never heard this, you're playing the game. I'm going to draw a line for you. It's going to be called the truth scale. This is 0. This is 100. At 0, this is an absolute black lie. If I say that those chairs are white, that's a 0, all right? Now this is 100. This is absolutely truth. Those chairs are maroon. Now, where does Satan live? In our life, where does he live? Where does he play? 80%? 50%? See, most of us, and I used to think, he kind of lived in that 50% line, right? Because that just makes sense. He's a liar. Satan lives at 99.9. That's where he does his best work. He lives on the technicalities. And so when we start flirting with technical lines and we start thinking that we're playing games with God, man, we are flirting with the devil. We're dancing with him because it's the same language he uses. It's a technicality. And that's where Abraham is. He's saying, listen, this is on you. If you'd been better people, then I wouldn't have had to do this thing. And technically, she is kind of my sister. And then the third thing that he does, which just blows my mind, he says, and besides, if God hadn't brought me here, this wouldn't be an issue. This is God's fault, kind of. But that's why I did these things, Abimelech. What do you think? We play that game all the time. We play it personally. We play it corporately. We got to be careful with the language that we use. In some ways, I just want to take Abraham by the collar and I want to say, man, would you just own up? Would you just take responsibility for your act? Would you just say you messed up? Would you just say once, I sinned? I shouldn't have done this thing. You know that story I was telling you about with Joe? Man, that's a hard spot to be as a dad. I don't know if you've ever had to apologize to your sons or daughters. I've done it many times over the years. Because I'm not perfect. I'm not at all. And I've literally said to every one of my children, I'm sorry I hurt you. And I don't mean physically. I mean relationally. I'm sorry I lost my cool. I'm sorry I didn't practice self-control. I'm sorry that I went back to my old vomit. Because I should have known better. This is on me. Taking responsibility is foreign to us unless we have a relationship with God. Man, there have been many times over the years that my dad would just thump me on the back of the head. I've carried this practice into my own home. If Evan's acting stupid, I just pop him right on the back of the head. The first time I did that, he was like, oh, that hurts. And I popped him again. Oh, what are you doing? Because he hadn't figured it out. I popped him a third time. And I'm not talking like with a 2x4. Let's get real. It was a baseball bat. Finally, all I had to say to Evan is just say you messed it. Just say you messed up. That's all you have to do, buddy. Just own it. And then it got even more fun as he aged, and I would tell him that a wise man loves discipline because it says that in Proverbs. I love it when God thumps me on the back of the head because it tells me a weakness that I didn't already know. It helps me change and be better. It helps me chase progress, not perfection. It helps me take a step closer to Him in my processes with God. And so now when I'm given discipline, my reaction spiritually is, God, thanks for doing that. I needed that. And that language carried over into our own home. So now discipline in our home isn't some vile corruption. It's actually a beautiful act of love. And so when you pop the kids on the head, they say, thanks, Dad. Literally, they do. They probably won't do it to you. They'll probably knock you out. But they say it to me, all right? Because of the relationship that's been built, because rules without relationship lead to rebellion. So the closer you get to your children and the more you discipline them, the more they'll understand why you're doing it. It's because you love them. And this is discipline from the Father. And I love that even through this wrong turn, even through coming back to the same spot, God shows incredible mercy. He shows, even through Abraham's language, He steps in and He still blesses Abraham, which is so weird. But that's the sort of God that we serve, because His heart is bending towards the Father. Look at what God does. He shows off in verse 14. So Abimelech brings sheep and cattle, male and female slaves. He gives them to Abraham. I love this part. And he returns Sarah, his wife, it says in Scripture, to him. And then Abimelech says, and I love this part too, my land is before you, live wherever you like. He says that to Abraham. And then he turns to Sarah and he says these words, hey, I'm giving your brother, you catch the sarcasm here, I'm giving your brother some things. I'm giving him 1,000 shekels of silver, so that this covers our offenses. Now here's what that means. 1,000 shekels of silver is about 25 pounds of silver. There's 16 ounces in a pound. You figure out the math, the current rates as far as insurance, as far as like what this meant culturally to them. For Abraham, this was about 10 years worth of living. That's about the gift that Abimelech gives to Abraham. He sets him up pretty nice. Now, on today's market, that's not what the cost of silver is, unfortunately. But for 25 pounds of silver, he's saying, here's 10 years on me. You don't have to worry about the rest of your life. And so God blesses Abraham, and He blesses Abimelech. And Abimelech says to Sarah, This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Some versions say rebuked, some say reproved, but you're completely vindicated. That's what it says. So God gives Abraham prosperity and peace. He gives Abimelech physical restoration and spiritual sparedness. He gives Sarah vindication, reprove, and restoredness. I mean, restoration. This is incredible what God does. Even through these mistakes, even through this old cycle, even through going back to the same spots, he's still leaning in and he's still protecting and providing and blessing. And then it says that Abraham prays to God, and God heals Abimelech, his wife, his slave girl, so that they could have children again. There's that physical healing to Abimelech's home. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's house because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. As I was reading this, there was just this one thought that kept coming back to me. What if God allows us to keep coming back to the same spots over and over and over again so that we might take a different path and not go to our old puke? Remember earlier I said that having a great sense of direction helps with navigation, but Jesus is the only one that can ever bring us to perfection. We can't do this ourselves, right? He has to be the one that takes us by the hand. So this last week when I was preparing the sermon and I kind of put the bow on it, here's my typical sermon time in case you don't know. So like I know where we're going months ahead, and when it comes down to it in the week of the sermon, Thursday I find a hole, I find a spot, and I just kind of disappear for about a day where I just really pound on the iron is what I call it. I'm hitting the anvil. And so Thursdays are my day where I work at the office and I'm finishing sermon stuff. I'm polishing notes on the sermon. And literally I put the bow on the sermon. I think that's it. But one of the things that I love to do is I love to listen to worship music. As I'm writing sermons, I put on like a YouTube mix and I just listen to worship. That's all I do. And so I'm just overwhelmed by the Spirit. And as soon as I hit save on my very last document, a song came on that I had never heard before. And I thought, man, there's some stuff in this song that I was so overwhelmed with. I actually printed out the lyrics and I've got the video. I want you guys to listen to it because I think it fits so nicely with what we're doing. I think it was God's way of just saying, hey, we need to hear this. Here are some of the lyrics. It says, I don't want to trade your plan for something familiar. I can't waste a day, and I can't stay the same, at the end of the first verse. And the chorus says, I want to be different, I want to be changed, till all of me is gone, and all that remains is a fire so bright the whole world can see. There's something different, so come and be different in me. I don't want to spend my life stuck in a pattern. I don't want to gain this world and lose what matters. And then later in the second verse, he says this, and this was kind of a mind blower for me. I know that I am far from perfect, but through you, the cross still says I'm worth it. So I'd like you just to kind of meditate on this song as we close our time together. And if there's a decision that you'd like to make, I'd love to have that conversation with you. We don't have to do that up here. I'm going to be up here if you want prayer. We can do that anytime through the week. But I want you just to really listen in to this song and see what God does.
I wrote the song different a few years ago, but I feel like the Lord is teaching it to me in a whole new way right now. A few months ago, we found out that my grandmother has blood cancer. And as hard as it's been to watch her lose her hair as she takes her treatments, her faith has remained intact. A few weeks later, Hurricane Harvey came for my hometown and in 2 days poured 44 inches of rain on my house. As we're in the process of replacing the flooring and releveling our foundation, we keep waiting on things to get back to normal. And then just a few weeks ago, we found out that my little brother Daniel has stage 4 colon cancer. After the shock and the tears, my family is preparing to fight by his side as he gets ready to start chemo. And in the midst of all this, the prayer that I kept saying was, Jesus, can you just change these things? Can you stop the cancer? Can you stop the storms? But he's chosen not to stop these things just yet. And I'm finding out that sometimes The best question is not, Jesus, can you change these things around me? But instead, God, can you change me so that I can handle the things that you're walking me through? So I keep singing and praying and believing the words of this song because I know that he is changing me. And that is making all the difference. I don't want to hear anymore. Teach me to listen. I don't want to see anymore. Give me a vision that you could move this heart to be set apart. I don't need to recognize the man in the mirror, 'cause I don't want to trade your plans for something familiar. I can't waste a day, and I can't stay the same. I wanna be different, I wanna be changed, till all of me's gone, and all that remains is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different in me. I don't wanna spend my life stuck in a pattern, and I don't wanna gain this world but lose what matters. And so I'm giving up everything because I wanna be different. I wanna be changed till all of me's gone, and all that remains is a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different. Oh, I know that I am far from perfect, but through you the cross still says I'm worth it. So take this beating in my heart and come and finish what you started. When they see me, let them see you, 'cause I just wanna be different. Yeah. I wanna be different, I wanna be changed till all of me's gone, and all that remains always a fire so bright the whole world can see that there's something different. So come and be different. I just wanna be different. So could you be different in me?
Strength of your hand, with open arms, lifted hands, and down on bended knee. I don't have much, but it's all yours. I'm not here for me, I am yours. Not here for me. I'm grateful that I know your son. I know that he died for me. Because of him the war's been won, and I have a hope to be free. Despite this awful state I'm in, I know there's something I must do. I'm letting go of all that's been. I give it up to worship you. Open arms, lifted hands, and down on bended knee. I sing for you, I live here for me.